She was just calibrating scopes. No name recognition, no unit patch, just another civilian contractor in faded cargo pants. Quiet, unremarkable, easy to dismiss until they handed her a rifle, just to watch her fail, just for the laugh. But when the spotter called the distance 3,285 Masmitas clean hit, the entire range went silent because that shot wasn't luck. It wasn't beginner's fortune. It was muscle memory from places most of them had only heard about in whispers. Want to know what happens when you underestimate someone who used to do this for a living in places that don't exist on maps? Hit that subscribe button and drop a comment telling us where in the world you're watching from. Because this is the kind of story that changes how you look at the quiet ones forever, here on Graceful Valor Stories. You know that particular quality the air has on a military range when the sun's been beating down since dawn. It's not just hot, it's heavy, thick with the metallic smell of spent brass, the sharp bite of gunpowder residue, and something else you can't quite name. Maybe it's the weight of concentration, or just the accumulated sweat of people whose lives might depend on hitting what they aim at. The British training facility at Thornfield had that smell in spades this Tuesday morning. Long concrete shooting bays stretched out like fingers pointing toward distant targets, each one echoing with the rhythmic crack of precision rifles and the metallic ping of ejected casings hitting stone. Instructors barked corrections over the noise, their voices carrying that particular edge that comes from knowing that sloppy habits in training become fatal mistakes in the field. And there, almost invisible in the controlled chaos, was Erin Bell. She worked methodically along the equipment bench, her gray civilian fatigues already showing sweat stains despite the early hour. Her toolkit was spread beside her with the kind of obsessive organization that spoke of years doing work where a misplaced screwdriver could cost someone their life. The ID badge clipped to her shirt pocket was simple enough. NATO Optics Group Civilian Calibration Tech. The kind of credential that made you part of the furniture to people with more important things on their minds, which was exactly how Erin preferred it. She'd been working on a finicky scope mount for the better part of an hour, making adjustments measured in thousandths of an inch with tools that cost more than most soldiers made in a month. Her hands moved with practiced efficiency. No wasted motion, no hesitation, just the quiet competence of someone who'd learned that half measures got people killed. The group of young British snipers sprawled in the shade nearby might as well have been looking through her. They had that lean, sunburned arrogance that came with being the best shots in their unit, combined with the casual cruelty of 20-somethings who'd never been properly humbled. "Christ, did someone's Nan wander into the wrong building?" one of them said, loud enough to be heard, but quiet enough to maintain plausible deniability. His mate, a redhead with arms like fence posts, squinted theatrically. "That's not a toolkit. That's her knitting bag. Think she's here to darn our socks?" The laughter that followed had that particular edge of young men performing for each other, each joke needing to be a little cruder than the last to get the same reaction. Erin kept her safety glasses on and her attention on the scope mount. She'd heard worse from better men than these. The adjustment she was making required her full concentration anyway. A single click too far in either direction would throw the zero off by meters at long range. But shut! He wasn't deaf to the commentary floating over the range noise. 20 quid says she used to be a school nurse," one of them continued. "Nah, gym teacher. Look at those shoulders. Definitely coached netball or something equally terrifying." As she worked, Erin noticed things. The way Private Morrison's rifle was leaning against the bench, bolt closed on an empty chamber, which was sloppy. The carbon buildup on Corporal Hayes's muzzle brake that would throw his point of impact left by at least half a meter at distance. Small details that spoke of training shortcuts and equipment neglect. She also noticed that none of them had bothered to check their dope cards for current atmospheric conditions. The temperature had risen 8 degrees since morning. Humidity had dropped and the barometric pressure was falling. At long range, those variables could turn a perfect shot into a complete miss. But that wasn't her job to fix. She was here for the scopes, nothing more. Staff Sergeant Callum Bryce emerged from the equipment shed with the casual authority of someone who'd figured out that being loud was easier than being right. Early 30s, regulation haircut that looked like it cost more than his boots. Sleeves rolled to display qualification badges he'd earned in exercises most of these kids hadn't heard of. He carried a clipboard like it was Excalibur. He took one look at Aaron's setup and made a visible effort not to scowl. This lane's restricted during qualification runs. Aaron didn't look up from the scope she was adjusting. Your CO signed the work order himself. She tapped a sealed packet beside her toolkit. Official paperwork with stamps and signatures that would hold up under scrutiny. Bryce's jaw tightened, but he couldn't argue with proper authorization. Instead, he found another angle. Just don't get in the way when we start the serious shooting. The comment got another chuckle from his audience, though it felt forced now, like they were working harder to maintain the joke than it deserved. Aaron finished her adjustment and moved to the next rifle. This one a Barrett MRAD that someone had clearly been abusing. The bolt was gritty, the scope rings were loose, and the muzzle brake showed carbon buildup that would affect accuracy. She began her work with the same methodical patience, cleaning and adjusting with movements that were precise without being showy. Across the range, Sergeant Devin Cross was watching the whole exchange from behind a spotting scope. American Marine attached to the joint training exercise with the kind of weathered face that came from spending years in places where the sun was an enemy, and the wind told you things you needed to know. He'd been calling shots for British snipers all morning, but something about the woman at the equipment bench had caught his attention. It wasn't her tools, though they were better than standard issue. It wasn't her technique, though she worked with obvious competence. It was something in the way she moved, the economy of motion, the absolute certainty in her hand placement, the way she never had to look twice to find what she needed. He'd seen that kind of muscle memory before in places he wasn't supposed to talk about. Cross had also been listening to the commentary from the young Brits, and it was starting to grate on him. He'd served with enough different units to recognize real competence when he saw it. And he'd learned the hard way that the people you underestimated were usually the ones who ended up saving your life. "Murray," he called out to the redhead, "when's the last time you cleaned that muzzle brake?" Murray looked confused. Yesterday, Sergeant." "Yesterday when?" "Before or after you fired 60 rounds through it?" "After?" "I think." "You think?" Cross's voice carried that particular edge that made Junior Enlisted suddenly pay attention. "Walk over here and look. Through this scope. Tell me what you see on your rifle." Murray approached reluctantly and peered through Cross's spotting scope, which was trained on his weapon, even at 20 mem. The carbon fouling was visible around the brake ports. "That's not clean, Marine." "That's... I ran a patch through it and called it good." Cross's voice was quiet, but carried clearly. "At 800 mem, that buildup will throw your shot off by 6 in. At longer range, you might as well be throwing rocks." The laughter from the group died down considerably. Nothing killed military humor faster than being reminded that sloppy work had consequences. Ever wonder what secrets hide behind a quiet contractor's toolkit? Stay tuned, her skills will leave you speechless here on Graceful Valor Stories. The morning wore on with the usual rhythm of military training. Brief periods of intense focus punctuated by longer stretches of waiting, adjusting, and trying not to melt in the heat. Erin continued her work, invisible to most, but drawing increasingly curious glances from the few who knew enough to recognize precision when they saw it. Around midday, when the heat had reached that shimmering intensity that made distant targets dance like mirages, Staff Sergeant Bryce decided to provide some entertainment for his troops. "You know what?" he announced loud enough to carry across the bay. "Why don't we see what our calibration expert can do with all that fancy equipment?" A few heads turned, sensing opportunity for amusement. Aaron looked up from the cleaning kit she'd been using on a rifle bolt. "I'm here to service equipment, not fire it." "Come on," Bryce pressed, warming to his theme. "All that careful adjustment work. Don't you want to see if it actually works?" Someone in the back called out, "Give her something light. Wouldn't want her to break a hip." More laughter, though it was starting to sound hollow in the heat. "Arrow. Anne set down her cleaning rod and considered the request with the kind of careful attention she'd been giving the rifle scopes. No anger, no offense taken, just professional evaluation of a situation that had taken an unexpected turn. "What did you have in mind?" she asked. Bryce's grin widened. He gestured toward the Barrett Emerald she'd just finished servicing. "Let's see what you can do with that one." "Nothing fancy. Just hit the 800-meter target and we'll all be impressed." The suggestion drew more attention. Other shooters drifted over, drawn by the promise of watching a civilian try to handle military hardware. The Barrett was no joke. A .338 Lapua Magnum that could put a hole through an engine block at 2 mi in the right hands. In the wrong hands, it would knock someone flat on their ass and probably leave them with a dislocated shoulder. Erin walked over to where the rifle sat on its bipod, studying it like she was reading fine print. She picked it up, not gingerly, not like she was handling something foreign, but with the casual familiarity of someone who'd done this thousands of times before. The weight settled into her hands like it belonged there. Cross, still watching from his spotting position, felt something click in his memory. The way she shouldered the rifle, the automatic check of the safety, the finger discipline that never put her index finger near the trigger until she was ready to shoot. These weren't learned responses. They were hardwired reflexes. "You need a spotter," he called out. Erin glanced over at him, and for just a moment their eyes met with the kind of recognition that passed between professionals who understood each other without needing words. "If you can keep up," she said. Cross felt his pulse quicken. There was something in that response, a confidence that had nothing to do with brawl. Vado and everything to do with experience. He moved to the spotting scope, making quick adjustments for the changing light and wind conditions. "What's your target?" Bryce was still grinning, enjoying the show. The 800-meter board should be a nice challenge for someone who usually works with screwdrivers. But Cross was looking through his scope at something else entirely. The range had targets set at various distances, but the farthest board was way beyond the standard training markers. He could barely make it out through the heat shimmer. "There's a target at 3,285 Malm," he said quietly. "Long-range practice board." Erin nodded like this was perfectly normal information. "Wind conditions light and variable, maybe 3 knots from the northwest. Mirage is heavy. It'll throw off your point of aim by at least 2 meters at that distance." The casual way they were discussing extreme long-range shooting made several people stop what they were doing. 3,000 kilometers was beyond the effective range of most military snipers. It was the kind of distance where you needed perfect conditions, perfect equipment, and years of experience to even come close. "She's not seriously considering that," someone whispered. "Has to be a joke." But Erin was already moving to the shooting mat, settling into position with movements that looked choreographed. They were so smooth. She adjusted the bipod legs with tiny corrections, found her natural point of aim, and began the breathing routine that every sniper learned, but few ever mastered. The range went quiet. Not the commanded silence of official business, but the organic hush that falls when everyone suddenly realizes they're witnessing something significant. Cross made final adjustments to his spotting scope, calculating wind drift, atmospheric pressure, temperature gradients, and a dozen other variables that could turn a perfect shot into a complete miss at extreme range. His voice, when he called the conditions, carried the crisp professionalism of someone who'd done this in places where missing wasn't just embarrassing, it was fatal. Winds dropped to nothing. Mirage is steady at 2 meters left. Range 3,085 confirmed. Behind them, he could hear the whispered conversation of the British soldiers who had finally realized this wasn't a joke anymore. She's actually going to try it at that range in this heat. Even our best shooters don't attempt shots over 3,000. Bryce stepped closer. His earlier confidence completely evaporated. "Ma'am, you don't have to do this. The 800-meter target is perfectly adequate for a—" "I'm fine." Erin cut him off without taking her eye from the scope. Her voice carried the calm finality of someone who'd made a decision and wasn't interested in debate. Cross recognized that tone. He'd heard it from operators who'd moved beyond doubt into the zone where everything became simple. Target conditions shot. Everything else was just noise. Aaron's breathing slowed. The kind of controlled respiration that lowered heart rate, steadied hands, and created the perfect moment between heartbeats when the body was absolutely still. Through his spotting scope, Cross could see the heat shimmer, distorting the air like liquid glass. At this distance, that mirage would bend light rays and throw off the point of impact by meters, if not properly compensated. Most shooters would never even attempt to calculate it. But Aaron had already made her adjustments. She took the slack out of the trigger. The shot, when it came, cracked across the range like a thunderclap. The big rifle bucked against her shoulder, but she rode the recoil like she was part of the weapon system, already working the bolt for a follow-up shot before the first round had even reached its target. Cross stayed glued to his spotting scope, following the trace of the bullet across the shimmering distance. At extreme range, there was always that eternal moment when the shot was in flight, but the result was unknown. Time stretched like taffy, while physics and ballistics played out their ancient dance. Impact, he called, his voice carefully controlled. Center mass. The silence that followed was complete. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Confirm the distance, Bryce said, his earlier confidence completely evaporated. Cross double-checked his scope, verified the range markers, recalculated the math that he'd already done twice. 3,285 millisem. Clean hit. Someone dropped a piece of equipment. The metallic clatter seemed obscenely loud in the sudden quiet. That's not possible, one of the younger shooters whispered. Not possible for us, Cross corrected quietly. But then again, we're not her. Aaron worked the bolt and ejected the spent brass, catching it in her palm with practiced ease. She didn't celebrate, didn't gloat, didn't even smile, just safed the rifle and began the process of clearing the chamber, following the same safety protocols she'd probably been doing since most of these soldiers were in primary school. Could this woman be a legend in disguise? Now, keep watching. Her past will blow your mind here on Graceful Valor Stories. Staff Sergeant Bryce found his voice, though it came out rougher than he'd intended. Run it again, sir. Cross looked confused. I said run it again. One shot could be luck. Wind pocket, atmospheric anomaly, whatever. Let's see if she can repeat it. Aaron looked up from the rifle she was checking. You want me to shoot again? If you don't mind humoring us? She considered this for a moment, then nodded. Different target, same distance, different aiming point. Cross adjusted his spotting scope to a fresh target board at the same extreme range. Conditions are changing. Winds picked up to maybe 5 knots, still from the northwest. Mirage is getting worse. The second shot was even more impressive than the first because now everyone knew what they were watching. This wasn't a fluke or a lucky accident. This was someone demonstrating a level of marksmanship that most of them had only heard about in stories. Aaron settled back into position with the same methodical precision, made tiny adjustments based on Cross's wind call, controlled her breathing, and squeezed the trigger at the exact moment when all the variables aligned. The rifle cracked. The bullet flew its impossible arc across the desert heat. Impact, Cross called, his voice carrying a respect that hadn't been there an hour earlier. Dead center. This time, the silence felt different. Not shock exactly, but recognition. The kind that came when you realized you were in the presence of someone whose skills transcended normal categories. One of the British instructors approached with a tablet, accessing databases that required security clearances most people didn't have. His fingers moved quickly across the screen, inputting search parameters that would normally trigger security reviews. What came back made him blink hard and read it again. Bell, Aaron, he read quietly. Civilian contractor status. Previous assignment. He paused, his eyes widening. Operation Wild Lantern. Embedded weapons specialist. Security classification. Another pause. Above my access level. Cross felt pieces clicking together in his memory. Operation Wild Lantern, Afghanistan 2019, remote firebase, hostile contact, and rifle teams that could reach out and touch targets at distances that defied belief. He'd been there for part of it, a scared Marine corporal calling in coordinates while unseen shooters eliminated threats from positions no one could identify. He'd always wondered who those shooters were. Now he knew. Wild Lantern, he said, testing the words. I was there. Erin looked up from the rifle she was safing. For the first time since arriving, she made direct eye contact with one of the soldiers watching her, Korengal Province Firebase, Charlie. You had a radio malfunction and no overwatch. Cross felt his breath catch. That was you? That was us. We kept you covered while you called in the extraction. The memory came flooding back. 12 hours pinned down by sniper fire, running low on ammunition, radio crackling with static, and then suddenly the incoming fire just stopped. One by one, the hostile positions went silent. Clean, precise, professional elimination from ranges that seemed impossible. He remembered the confusion afterward. Intelligence reports that didn't make sense. Ballistics analysis that suggested shots from positions where no friendly forces were supposed to be. His squad leader had eventually written it off as lucky artillery strikes, but Cross had known better. Artillery didn't pick off individual targets with surgical precision. We never saw you, he said quietly. Never heard the shots, never saw muzzle flashes. We just knew that people trying to kill us kept not trying to kill us anymore. That was the point, Erin replied. You weren't supposed to see us. Murray, the redhead, who'd started the morning with jokes about knitting bags, stepped forward hesitantly. Ma'am, how many people were in your team? Erin considered the question. Depends on the operation. Usually 2, sometimes 4. 4 people did all that. She shrugged with the same casual dismissal she'd shown all morning. We had good positions. He'd never seen the shooters, never knew their names, or their faces, or even their nationality, but their work had kept him and 5 other Marines alive long enough for the extraction birds to reach them. You saved our lives, he said simply. Erin shrugged, with the same casual dismissal she'd shown all morning. We did our job. Your job was hitting targets most people can't even see. Our job was making sure people like, you got home. The weight of that statement settled over the range like a physical presence. This wasn't about marksmanship contests or showing off. This was about professionals who'd operated in the spaces between official recognition and necessary action, doing work that saved lives without anyone ever knowing their names. Staff Sergeant Bryce cleared his throat, though his voice still came out rough. Ma'am, I owe you an apology. Erin finished packing her tools with the same methodical care she'd used all morning. No, you don't. I do. We all do. She shouldered her kit bag and looked around at the assembled soldiers. Young faces that had gone from mockery to respect in the space of 2 rifle shots. You don't owe me anything, she said quietly. But you might consider paying attention before you make assumptions about people. She walked toward the exit without fanfare, no speeches, no demand for recognition, just a professional who'd completed an unexpected demonstration and was ready to move on to the next job. Cross caught up with her at the gate. Will we see you again? Probably not. This was a one-time calibration contract. What you did today. Those kids will remember it for the rest of their careers. Erin paused, considering this. Maybe they'll remember to look twice before they decide what someone is capable of. Is that why you took the shots, to teach them a lesson? She adjusted her kit bag and looked back at the range where soldiers were already gathering around the Barrett MRAD, examining it like it might hold secrets they could learn. I took the shots because someone asked me to, she said. Everything else was just bonus. She walked away without looking back, leaving behind a range full of soldiers who would never again assume that quiet competence was the same thing as limited capability. Cross returned to find the others clustered around the spotting scope, taking turns looking at the targets Erin had hit. The bullet holes were perfectly centered, Textbook examples of precision shooting at ranges most of them would never attempt. "How long do you think she's been doing this?" one of them asked. "Long enough to make it look easy," Cross replied. Staff Sergeant Bryce was standing apart from the group, staring at the spent brass casings Aaron had left behind. Each one showed tiny markings, calibration codes that probably meant nothing to most people, but represented years of specialized training to someone who knew how to read them. "Sir," one of his soldiers approached, "what do we put in the training report?" Bryce considered the question. How do you document the impossible? How do you explain that a civilian contractor had just demonstrated shooting skills that exceeded anything in their training manuals? "Standard equipment calibration," he said finally. "All weapon systems performing within acceptable parameters. That's it." Because some things couldn't be captured in official reports. Some skills transcended normal categories, and some people preferred to remain invisible, even after proving they were anything but ordinary. The afternoon training sessions continued with their usual rhythm. But something had changed. The casual arrogance was gone, replaced by a more thoughtful approach to their work. Equipment was handled with greater respect. Assumptions were questioned before being voiced. And whenever someone lined up for a long-range shot, they found themselves thinking about a quiet woman in civilian clothes who'd made the impossible look routine, then disappeared back into whatever shadows had hidden her before she'd briefly stepped into their light. The wind picked up as the sun began its descent toward the horizon, carrying with it the familiar smells of hot metal and spent gunpowder. But now it carried something else towed. Oh, the memory of precision that bordered on art, and the humbling knowledge that legends sometimes walked among them, wearing nothing more impressive than faded cargo pants and a contractor's badge. In the equipment shed, someone found a small piece of paper tucked under the bipod of the Barrett MRAD. Written in precise handwriting were elevation and windage settings for various ranges, atmospheric conditions, and ammunition types. Not the standard data from the manufacturer's manual, but custom calculations that would squeeze every possible bit of accuracy from the weapon system. At the bottom, in the same careful script, "For the next generation, use wisely." No signature, no name, just the gift of knowledge from someone who'd spent years learning lessons that couldn't be taught in any classroom. The paper was photocopied and distributed to every sniper in the unit. Within a week, it had found its way to training facilities across 3 continents. Within a month, it was being studied by marksmanship instructors who recognized the theoretical knowledge, but wondered where it had originated. But none of them would ever meet the woman who'd written it. She'd already moved on to the next job, the next quiet assignment, the next opportunity to use skills that most people couldn't imagine and fewer still could master. And somewhere out there, soldiers were coming home because their weapons shot a little truer. Their equipment performed a little better, and their training had been touched, however briefly, by someone who'd spent a lifetime perfecting the art of precision from the shadows. The legend of that day would grow in the telling, as military stories always do. But the core truth would remain unchanged. That competence doesn't require recognition. That expertise can wear any face. And that the most dangerous people in the world, and it's really often the ones you never see coming until they decide to let you see them, even if it's just for the length of time it takes to send a bullet across 3,285 milliliters of desert heat and into the center of a target most people couldn't hit with a prayer and a miracle. Then they disappear back into whatever quiet spaces they came from, leaving behind only the memory of impossibility made routine and the humbling knowledge that legends walk among us every day. We just don't usually notice them until they decide to remind us what real skill looks like. Have you ever completely misjudged someone based on first impressions? What would you have done if you were standing there when she made that impossible shot? And after watching someone turn mockery into respect with nothing but quiet competence, how would you treat the next person everyone else was ready to dismiss? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. We read every single one, and they help us tell better stories. Hit that like button if this reminded you that the most dangerous people are often the quietest ones, and that respect should be your default setting until someone proves they don't deserve it. Subscribe and tap the notification bell so you never miss these stories about the legends who walk among us wearing ordinary faces. Share this with someone who knows that true strength doesn't need to announce itself. It just shows up when needed and disappears when the job is done. Another story about hidden heroes is waiting for you right now. Just click the video on your screen and we'll see you there. Same time tomorrow, right here on Graceful Valor Stories, where we honor the quiet ones who keep the rest of us safe.